What's one moment in your life that changed everything in your family?
You ever get that feeling where you're smiling through your teeth, clapping for someone else, while deep down you're screaming, "What about me?" That tight, prickling sensation in your chest when people celebrate someone you know damn well hasn't put in half the effort you have, hasn't lifted a finger when things got hard, hasn't stayed up late solving other people's problems while quietly swallowing your own. Yeah, that was me. That is me. And I've gotten really, really good at pretending I'm fine with it. 5 years. That's how long it had been since either of my parents remembered my birthday. Not a phone call. Not a card. Not even one of those dumb auto-generated Facebook, HBD messages. I could have dropped dead on the third Wednesday of March, and they wouldn't have noticed until the next Thanksgiving when the family pictures didn't line up right. It wasn't always like that. I mean, it used to be different, way back, when we were kids and birthdays meant cake from the local grocery store and scratchy paper crowns and $5 bills tucked into Hallmark cards. But the shift happened slowly, like a door closing inch by inch while you're too distracted to realize you're about to be shut out. It started when Megan, my younger sister, hit puberty. She got prettier. Blonde, blue-eyed, bubbly, looked like someone right off a high school drama poster. And with that face came attention. Teachers loved her. Neighbors adored her. Mom and Dad? They couldn't stop beaming every time she entered the room, like she was the damn sun and the rest of us were lucky just to orbit her. Meanwhile, I got quieter. Smarter, maybe. More responsible. I worked. I studied. I got into college with scholarships they didn't understand, then grad school with no celebration, just a vague "oh, that's good." I never asked for anything. When money was tight, I figured it out. When Dad's business tanked in 2019, I was the one who bailed him out. I pulled money from my own emergency fund, the one I built while working 2 jobs in college, and wired it to his account without a single word of thanks. And when Mom called me crying about the house, about the mortgage, about how they might lose everything, I restructured my budget, paid off 3 months of their bills, and told her, "Don't worry, I've got you." She said I was a blessing, but not even once did she ask if I was okay, or if I needed help too. Then came Megan's birthday last weekend. She turned 20, and of course, they threw her this huge surprise party. A backyard affair, white tents, catered barbecue, those annoying string lights that make everything look Pinterest perfect. I flew in, by the way, on my dime. Took 2 days off from work, left behind a pile of deadlines, and arrived with a nice little gift, an engraved bracelet, personalized, meaningful. I spent real time thinking about it. I always do. I'm thoughtful like that. The minute I stepped out of the Uber, I knew exactly how the day was going to go. Megan was already posing for pictures in front of a balloon wall that said 20 and thriving. Dad was fiddling with a GoPro. Mom was making mimosas. No one looked at me for more than 2 seconds. I felt like a guest at a wedding where I didn't know the bride or the groom. I set the gift on the table with the others, surrounded by brand names and designer labels, and went to sit in the shade, watching from the sidelines as the star of the family held court. Then it happened. Near the end of the afternoon, Megan's boyfriend handed her a little key-shaped gift box. I figured it was symbolic, maybe a charm or something. But then Dad yelled for everyone to gather by the driveway, and that's when I saw it. A brand new car. A damn Lexus. With a red bow on it, just like in those obnoxious holiday commercials where smiling families give each other $30,000 surprises like they're ordering takeout. The crowd clapped. Mom teared up. Megan squealed and jumped into Dad's arms. And me? I just stood there with a paper plate of cold coleslaw and a cup of flat soda, feeling like a ghost. No one asked me to be in the pictures. No one mentioned the flight I took, or the job I left behind, or the bracelet I picked out so carefully. And still I smiled. I clapped. I even took a photo for them on someone else's phone. That's what I do. I make things easier for everyone. I stay quiet. I stay helpful. And then I go home and wonder why I feel so damn empty all the time. You want to know what made it worse? It was 3 days after my birthday. 3 days. Not even a belated text. Not a "oh shoot, we missed it." Nothing. I don't think they forgot. I think they just didn't care. Or maybe they assumed I was too grown up to care about that sort of thing. But here's the truth, no one ever grows out of wanting to feel like they matter. That night, after the party, I went back to the hotel room I booked for myself, because of course, no one offered me a place to stay, and I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the ceiling. I wasn't angry. Not really. I wasn't crying or plotting revenge or even surprised. I was just done. That was the only word that fit. Done trying. Done hoping. Done waiting for them to change. And that's when I decided. I wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't confront them, or demand apologies, or write some dramatic letter about how they'd hurt me. I would simply stop being useful. Quietly, methodically, completely. I would erase myself from the role they'd carved out for me, that of the dependable, invisible daughter, and let them feel the weight of the gap I used to fill. That was the night I smiled for the last time in their direction. It wasn't a happy smile. It was something colder, something sharper, like the calm right before a storm. Because I didn't want to scream anymore. I wanted to watch. There's a strange kind of power in silence, an unnerving, deliberate stillness that doesn't come from fear or hesitation, but from a decision so final and so absolute that words would only cheapen it. And when I walked out of that party, past the rented tents and the fake laughter and the streamers flapping half-heartedly in the warm evening wind, I didn't slam a door, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't even look back once, because by then, I had already made up my mind, they would never get another piece of me again, not my money, not my energy, not even my attention. On the flight back home, while the passengers around me swapped vacation stories or scrolled through baby pictures and birthday reels on their phones, I sat stiffly upright, hands clenched in my lap, eyes fixed on nothing, replaying 1,000 small moments over and over in my mind, not just the missed birthdays or the forgotten calls, but the pattern behind it all, the constant taking, the endless expectation that I would be the one who understood, who forgave, who adjusted, who didn't make things harder by asking for more than I was given. It wasn't just that they forgot my birthday 5 years in a row, though even saying that now feels surreal, like something a stranger would confess in a late-night talk show interview, not a reality I lived through, but it was the fact that when I did show up, when I flew in, smiled politely, handed over thoughtful gifts and asked them how they were doing, they looked right through me like I was a houseplant they never watered, but still expected to thrive in the corner, quietly greening there. Lives without fuss or need. You know, I used to excuse it. I'd tell myself they were just distracted, or that maybe my independent nature made them think I didn't care about birthdays or gestures or acknowledgement, but the truth is, it wasn't confusion or distraction or even poor communication, it was choice, plain and simple, the choice to prioritize Megan, to exalt her needs and her milestones above mine, to build a story around her that made them feel like good parents, while I remained the footnote, the useful one, the fallback plan they could rely on when things got tough, and then promptly forget once things smoothed out. And maybe that would have continued for another 5 years, hell, maybe forever if it weren't for the look on my mother's face when she saw the Lexus keys in Megan's hands, that glassy-eyed pride, that little half-sob of joy as she whispered, "You deserve this. Sweet girl, you really do," and in that moment, something inside me didn't just snap, it vaporized, like a fine thread pulled too tight for too long, giving way to a hollow, echoing kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. So I landed, walked into my apartment, dropped my bag by the door, and without even taking off my shoes, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started untying every knot they had ever laced into my life. I logged into my bank account and canceled every auto payment linked to their address, the utilities, the internet, the Netflix subscription they never paid for, the insurance I'd set up when Dad had heart surgery and couldn't get coverage on his own. I wiped it all clean in under 15 minutes, not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I finally understood that keeping those payments going wasn't kindness, it was complicity. Next, I opened my phone and blocked every number that belonged to them, Mom, Dad, Megan, even the family group chat where they mostly sent memes Megan posted on Instagram and occasionally asked if I could check on something important, like taxes or bank statements or the password to the online mortgage system that, by the way, was only paid up through last month because I quietly wired the difference when their checking account ran short again. And once all that was done, once the ties were cut and the channels were closed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the fleeting kind that comes from a bubble bath or a long walk, but a deep, cavernous stillness that reminded me what it was like to live for myself, to have space in my mind that wasn't constantly negotiating guilt and obligation and resentment dressed up as maturity. I didn't tell them. I didn't send a dramatic message or write a passive-aggressive Facebook post. I didn't wait for their reaction or hope for remorse. I simply disappeared from the roles they'd cast me in. And that silence? That absence? It was louder than any scream I could have given them. Of course, the first few days were quiet. I think they didn't notice right away, or maybe they assumed it was just me being busy, like I always was, the dependable ghost who floats in and out of their lives with spreadsheets and solutions and perfectly timed transfers. But by the end of the first week, things started to shift. Megan sent a text, something breezy and vague, like, "Hey, everything cool?" Mom said the water bill bounced. I read it. I put the phone down. I didn't respond. By week 2, the emails started. Short at first, just checking in. Then longer, more anxious, filled with forced cheer and loaded with questions they thought sounded casual, but were really just failed attempts to confirm whether I was still at their service. I didn't reply to those either. I watched them pile up in my inbox like unopened bills, and for once, I didn't feel the pull to fix it. Then, around the 3rd week, my cousin texted me. "Hey, your mom's been calling around. She's really freaked out. Says she hasn't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing, "Yeah, I'm okay. Just needed a break," and even that felt like more than they deserved. By the 4th week, my uncle left me a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I just saw the transcript pop up on my phone. "Emily, this is Uncle Rob. Your dad's worried. Not sure what's going on. Maybe just talk to them?" And for a second, just a flicker of a second, I felt that old tug in my chest, the one that said, maybe you're being too harsh. Maybe they just made a mistake. But then I remembered how it felt to be standing in that backyard, holding my own grief like a gift no one wanted, and I hardened again. I said nothing. Not out of spite, but out of survival. Because when someone shows you again and again that you're only valuable when you're useful, the most radical thing you can do is stop being available and see what's left of the relationship without your labor holding it up. What's left of mine? Nothing but silence. And I finally understood. That's exactly what they gave me, year after year. I just learned to echo it back. And now? I'm not angry. I'm not even sad. I'm just watching. Let's see how long it takes for them to realize what they lost. It started, as so many reckonings do, not with a bang or an outburst or some grand televised meltdown, but with something deceptively small. An overdue notice from the electric company that landed in my parents' inbox like a pebble dropped into a stagnant pond, barely making a splash at first, but rippling outward in ways no one could have foreseen, least of all them. And certainly not with the kind of clarity and scale that was about to unfold. The first missed payment caught them off guard, I'm sure, not because they couldn't afford it, not at first anyway, but because they'd grown so used to the quiet efficiency of having everything handled for them, month after month, year after year, that the idea of friction, of effort, of needing to be accountable for something so basic as flipping a switch or opening a bill, probably felt foreign, almost insulting, as if the universe had suddenly forgotten who they were supposed to be in this family dynamic. For years, I had taken care of those payments without discussion, without credit, without even a thank you text most of the time. The water, the electric, the gas, the car insurance, even the streaming services and phone plans had gradually found their way into my orbit, like tiny weights that, individually, didn't feel too heavy, but collectively dragged me further and further from any sense of freedom until I couldn't distinguish whether I was being generous or simply afraid of what would happen if I stopped. But when I did stop, when I logged into my accounts and deleted the payment links, revoked the permissions, shut off the pipelines that kept their lives running quietly behind the scenes, something fundamental shifted in the balance of our relationship, and I knew. even before the first confused voicemail came through, that they would feel it, not just logistically but emotionally, because I had finally removed the last invisible thread that kept me tied to their needs. The first voicemail from my mother came 2 days after the cutoff. She sounded tired, distracted, vaguely annoyed, as if her irritation was more with the inconvenience than with the reality that it had been me keeping the lights on. "Emily," she said, in that half-sighing tone she used when talking to customer service representatives or neighbors she didn't particularly like, "I think something's going on with the utility account. It says payment declined or something weird. Can you check it when you get a chance?" No hello, no how are you, no mention of the fact that we hadn't spoken in weeks, just a request, framed as an assumption, tossed into the void with the confidence of someone who still believed I would respond out of habit. I didn't respond. By the end of that week, the emails took on a different tone, still polite, but a little sharper, more urgent, with phrases like, "We just need a quick update," and "It's probably a technical glitch," and "We're sure it's nothing serious." As though they were trying to convince themselves that I was merely delayed, distracted, perhaps bogged down by work, but certainly not angry, certainly not making a conscious choice to stay silent. Megan reached out too, though in her case it came through Instagram first, a vague, passive-aggressive story post about how some people forget who was always there for them, followed by a direct message 2 hours later that simply read, "Everything okay? Mom said there's something wrong with the accounts." I read it. I deleted it. Not because I wanted to punish her, truthfully, I wasn't even sure she fully understood how much I'd been holding together for so long, but because I had reached a point where explaining myself felt like trying to justify breathing. And I was done being the translator for my own pain. Then came the second wave. The car payment bounced. That one hit faster, because it was the lease on the silver Toyota Camry my mom drove to her part-time job and her volunteer brunches and her Pilates classes. The one she liked to pretend she had negotiated herself even though the down payment came directly from my account, camouflaged under the banner of family support, and never once acknowledged for what it was, a sacrifice I made without applause or complaint. When the lease company called her about the declined transaction, she must have panicked, because the next voicemail came within the hour, this time sharper, colder, laced with a kind of brittle disbelief that almost made me laugh. "Emily, this is getting serious now," she said, her voice clipped, controlled, like she was trying not to raise it in front of someone else. "We don't know what's going on, but you need to call us immediately. This isn't like you." She was right. It wasn't like me. It was the new me, the me who had finally stopped begging for scraps of affection with acts of invisible service, who had spent the last decade being indispensable in ways no one saw, and still somehow always ended up being the afterthought at every family event, the one holding the camera while Megan posed, the one writing checks while Megan opened presents. This time, I wasn't going to fix it. This time, I was going to let the silence do the talking. By the end of the second week, the financial confusion had morphed into full-blown panic. My father, who hadn't called me directly in over a year, left a terse voicemail that started with my name, Emily, said in a tone I hadn't heard since I was 16, and forgot to pick Megan up from soccer practice. He tried to sound calm, but there was an edge to it, something frayed and unsteady beneath the surface. "Look, we need to talk. I don't know what this is all about, but your mother's getting very upset, and I think it's time we clear the air." Clear the air. As if the problem was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, a little family squabble we could laugh about over dinner if I'd just stopped being so sensitive and dramatic. They still didn't get it. They didn't realize that I wasn't having a tantrum, I was closing a chapter. A long, painful, deeply exhausting chapter where I was expected to pour out everything I had in exchange for the occasional nod of acknowledgement, and now, finally, that chapter was over. Megan tried again the following week, this time with a text that said, "Can we please talk? This is getting kind of extreme." I almost answered. Almost. But then I remembered the last time I told her I felt invisible, how she laughed and said, "You're just being hormonal, like my feelings were a glitch in the system instead of a consequence of years of imbalance, and I knew, in my bones, That anything I said now would only be twisted into evidence of instability, of ingratitude, of me being the problem. So I said nothing. I watched. I let the system crash under its own weight. And in that watching, I found something I hadn't expected: satisfaction, not in their suffering, but in my own restraint, in the knowledge that I didn't need to scream to be heard. All I had to do was stop answering. All I had to do was cut the cord. And when they realized I wasn't coming back, that's when the real panic began. There's something disturbingly predictable about the way people react when the one they've always depended on suddenly removes themselves from the script, how quickly concern curdles into blame, how discomfort with silence gives way to desperate revisionism, and how those who once clapped their hands for you as long as you were useful will turn those same hands into pointing fingers the second you stop being convenient. I didn't expect an apology. That much I knew better than to hope for. What I didn't fully anticipate, what took me by surprise even after years of swallowing my own bitterness, was how fast the story began to change once I refused to feed their version of reality. At first, the absence of my voice in the usual channels was like a crack forming in the wall of a house they'd spent decades pretending was stable. It started small, a few text messages unanswered, a bounced payment here or there, but within weeks, the quiet had deepened into something they couldn't explain without admitting the truth, and since admitting the truth would mean acknowledging the years of neglect, of favoritism, of emotional laziness and financial dependency, they took a different path. They rewrote me. Not as the daughter who gave quietly and asked for little, not as the woman who paid their bills and kept their secrets and put her own needs aside more times than she could count, but as a liability, as the source of drama. As someone whose distance must be caused by instability, not self-preservation. I found out through my aunt, of all people, a woman who once offered to co-sign a loan for Megan when she wanted to study wellness coaching online and needed someone to vouch for her, but who never once asked me how I was affording my PhD. She called me out of the blue, her voice falsely chipper, coated in that thin southern sweetness that always seems to precede a verbal ambush, and she said, "Now listen, honey, your mama says you've been real stressed lately and that you might be going through something. She said you just kind of cut everybody off and haven't really explained why. You know we love you, right? But you can't just go ghost on your family like this. It's not healthy. Not healthy." That's what she said. As though my silence wasn't the most measured, deliberate thing I had done in years. As though the only possible explanation for my withdrawal was a breakdown, a mental spiral, something irrational and self-destructive. It never occurred to any of them, not once, that maybe I had simply grown tired of being the reliable one in a family that only noticed me when things fell apart. That maybe, after years of being the scaffolding that held up their fragile egos and finances, I had stepped away not because I was broken, but because I was finally whole enough to walk. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I thanked her for the call, assured her I was fine, and hung up before the bitter taste of her pity could linger too long. But it was in that moment, in that single passive-aggressive conversation, that I realized just how thoroughly my parents had begun to reshape the narrative, casting themselves as the victims of my emotional withdrawal, painting my silence as cruelty. Rewriting history with the kind of delusion only people afraid of guilt are capable of producing. I could see it happening like a scene from a poorly written play, my mother wringing her hands at brunch, telling her friends I'd always been a little distant, my father shrugging and saying he didn't know what had gotten into me, Megan posting vague, cryptic captions about choosing peace even when others choose chaos. And the worst part? They probably believed it. They had spent so long justifying their treatment of me, so long convincing themselves that I didn't need attention, or praise, or emotional care, that when I finally did something uncharacteristic, something that exposed the very foundation of our dysfunction, they couldn't reckon with it. So they buried it beneath a layer of self-defense, thick with guilt avoidance and bad faith concern, and then sold that version to everyone who'd listen. I got another message that week. This time from a family friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who used to call me the smart one in a tone that always felt more condescending than admiring. He said, "Your folks are real worried, Em. Sounds like there's a lot going on. You know they love you, right? And that's when I knew, really knew, that they were trying to get ahead of the truth. They were building a cushion of sympathy around themselves before anyone could ask the obvious question, "What did you do to drive your daughter away?" Because here's the thing they never understood. I didn't want revenge. Not in the cartoon villain sense. I wasn't trying to destroy them, or ruin their reputation, or make them beg on their knees for forgiveness. I just wanted space, clean, untouched space to breathe without the constant undertow of guilt, without the quiet expectation that I'd jump in and fix whatever they'd let fall apart this time. But they couldn't give me that. So I took it. And to protect that space, to guard the silence I had fought so hard to earn, I had to go one step further. I wrote one email. Not to them. Not to Megan. But to my attorney. It was short, clinical, stripped of emotion. It listed every account, every connection, every shared asset I had even remotely touched over the years, credit authorizations, bank links, cosign documents, financial liabilities that I had assumed for the sake of keeping things smooth, and I asked her, plainly and professionally, to sever them all. Permanently. No access. No ties. No reactivation without my written consent. She replied within 24 hours, "Understood. I'll handle everything discreetly." And just like that, the final thread snapped. There was no big announcement. No confrontation. No staged intervention or teary-eyed phone call. There was only silence, mine, unwavering and intentional, and the slow realization on their end that they could no longer reach me, no longer lean on me, no longer pull me back into a cycle that had always left me depleted and unseen. The house of cards I had been propping up was finally collapsing under its own weight. And for once, I wasn't the one trying to save it. Let them blame me. Let them spin their stories and collect their sympathies and tell the world I lost my mind. Because I didn't lose anything. I just stopped giving. There is a particular kind of silence that settles in once the dust of a collapsed structure finally lands, a silence not born of peace or reconciliation, but of absence, of an echoing void where noise once disguised dysfunction, where roles were rigid and predictable, and where the unspoken contract of emotional labor, once sustained by guilt and loyalty, has been irrevocably severed without ceremony or explanation. In the months that followed my departure, because that's what it was, a departure, not just from communication but from identity, from the exhausted shell of the role I had been assigned, I didn't reach back, didn't peek through the digital curtains, didn't test the locks I had so deliberately sealed. Instead, I moved forward with the kind of calm that only comes after the fire has already done its damage, when there's nothing left to salvage, only space where something new might one day grow. I moved to a new apartment in a quieter part of the city, not out of fear of being found, but because I craved an environment that didn't remind me of who I had to be for them, where I could walk into a room and not feel the ghost of expectations trailing behind me. I changed my phone number, closed the email account they had used for years, and redirected all necessary correspondence to a private inbox known only to my lawyer, my accountant, and one or two friends who had never once asked me to explain the emotional calculus behind my choices. I did not send a goodbye message. I did not offer a final word. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that closure was a myth peddled by those who never truly had to endure the burden of staying silent while everyone else spun a version of events in which you were always the villain, never the survivor. There were still attempts, of course, small, desperate flares sent into the dark. One morning, I found a handwritten letter in my new mailbox, the handwriting unmistakably my father's, sharp, angular, with that slight downward slant he had never bothered to correct. It was a single page, folded neatly, the envelope unsealed as though even the act of licking it closed had felt too final for him to stomach. He didn't start with "Dear Emily." He didn't even apologize. He began with a statement that might have passed for contrition if I didn't know better. "We didn't realize you felt so alone. We always thought you were the strong one." And in that one sentence, I could see the entire justification laid bare, the convenient assumption that strength is immunity, that the ability to survive neglect is proof that no harm was done, that being the strong one means you don't need softness or recognition or, God forbid, equal love. He went on to say they were worried, confused, heartbroken. He mentioned how the family had started asking questions, how even Megan had expressed regret over things that had been said or not said, though notably, he didn't quote her directly. And the tone of that part felt more like a last-ditch PR move than genuine reflection. He closed by saying they hoped, when I was ready, I'd come back, no questions, no judgment, just come back home, as if home was still a place that existed for me. As if the version of home I remembered hadn't burned itself to the ground while I was still standing inside it. I didn't respond. I didn't even keep the letter. I read it once, standing barefoot in my new kitchen, then folded it back into its envelope and placed it on top of the recycling pile next to a stack of old grocery circulars and expired coupons. There was nothing in it for me, not resolution, not understanding, not even a sincere apology, just the same vague appeals to unity and forgiveness, the same unwillingness to name the harm they had caused, to take real accountability for the way they had leaned on me like scaffolding for so many years while giving all the credit to the view. And still, I wasn't angry. That surprised me more than anything. I wasn't holding on to rage or bitterness or even grief. What I felt was something cleaner, something quieter, something that no longer needed validation to exist, certainty. Not in their character. They were still the same people, shaped by the same blind spots and selective memories, but in my own worth, which no longer hinged on how useful I was to others, how quietly I could bear the weight of being overlooked. In a strange way, I had become something they never expected me to be, untouchable. Not invincible, not hard or cruel, but no longer within reach, no longer molded by their moods or guilt or silence. I had taken their power over me and turned it into distance, into clarity, into something that could not be bargained with or undone by a single act of panic disguised as affection. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I allow myself to remember, not in the maudlin, nostalgic way I used to, but with the detached curiosity of someone studying a former life. I remember the time I came home from college with a 4.0 GPA and a scholarship award, only to find the entire living room filled with Megan's friends throwing her a graduation party she hadn't even planned. I remember the Thanksgiving where I sat in the kitchen prepping side dishes while Mom cooed over Megan's store-bought pie like it was a miracle from Martha Stewart herself. I remember being 17, standing outside in the snow, waiting for someone to pick me up from a school function they'd forgotten I had, watching other kids pile into warm cars, wondering what it meant that no one ever ran late for me. And then I remember that girl is gone now. She didn't disappear. She evolved. She grew teeth and boundaries and a spine made of steel wrapped in velvet. She learned that being the strong one was never a compliment, it was a role, assigned without consent, a way to avoid having to care too deeply for someone they assumed could survive without kindness. She learned that survival isn't the same as love. So no, I never went back. Not for the holidays, not for birthdays, not for the vague Facebook invites to family dinners that I knew were just attempts to reset the narrative, to reclaim their roles without earning them. I stayed gone. I stayed quiet. And in doing so, I gave myself something they never could, a life on my own terms. Let them wonder. Let them tell their stories. Let them sit in their panic and confusion and slowly circle the same question like dogs chasing their tails. What happened to Emily? Why did she just vanish? And maybe one day they'll figure it out. Maybe one day, in the deep hours of the night, they'll whisper the truth to each other, softer than they can bear. We didn't forget her birthday. We forgot her. But even if they don't, if they never do, that's fine too. Because I remember everything. And that's enough.